Hey guys, this is Vernier for cardowners.com, bringing you part 5 of Crushing the Micros, updated for 2013. So today's topic is going to be facing a 3-bet when we raise from early position. And because we're doing this in a quickie format, I'm going to divide this into 2 parts. So today I'm going to lay out a little bit of theory and discuss a couple of hand strength categories, but we'll get to that in a second. The first thing that I like to do is figure out how often do you face a 3-bet. You guys play on different kind of sites and you play on different kind of limits. So it's always kind of good to know what the dynamics of your specific site are. I'm working with a player who is playing 25 no limit on PokerStars. And here is how we're going to go about figuring out how often he faces a 3-bet. So I have a spreadsheet on Excel, and the first column just has the positions that we're in, and on the first row has the different positions that someone can be 3-betting us from. And the way we do it on Hold'em Manager 2 is we start out by going to we have all the positions, and we want to know how often, when it's unopened, do we raise. So actually I'm going to have this as any, and I'm going to have PFR equal yes. Assuming that the player never limps, this should give us everything we need. So from early position, when it's unopened, he raises 3,552 hands, etc., etc., etc. So this column is the column B. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to face a 3-bet. So we go to Advanced Filters, we go to Face Preflop 3-bet, hit True. We go back to Basic Filters, and not only do we want to know how often we face a 3-bet, we also want to know how often that 3-bet is specifically from a certain position. So we want to know how often the 3-better is from middle position. So that's what we select here. We hit OK, and we see that when we raise from early position, 142 times we faced a 3-bet from middle position. So we then include that here, and that shows us that when we raise from early position, we face a 3-bet from middle position 4% of the time. So then from here, we just divide 142 divided by 3,552, and then we go on to the next one. So 3-better's position is from the cutoff. Save it again. Make sure you switch it to 3-better every time instead of just razor. And as we can see, we have 150 and 167, and those are those numbers here. When we raise from early position, the cutoff 3 bets 150 times. The middle position, when we are in middle position, the cutoff 3 bets 167. So you put all this information out. You put all this information in, I should say, and then it gives us some totals. It gives us how often we face 3 bets when we raise from different positions, from specific positions. So as you can see, the thing that we're interested in today is this early position. So when we raise from early position, we get 3-bet from middle position about 4% of the time, from the cutoff about 4.2, from the button about 4.6, from the small blind 3.7, and from the big blind 2.8. So the first thing that tells us is when we raise from early position, if we face a 3-bet from the big blind, in general, that's going to be the strongest range. And we face a 3-bet on the button, in general, that's going to be the weakest range. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. But it's always good to take a look at these numbers and just have a general sense of what different raises from different positions mean. So there are 6 hand history groups that I want to focus on, and we're actually going to organize the material in this video into these 6 hand history groups. They are fairly unique in the way that they're I would recommend playing them. So I broke them down into kings and aces is 1, queens and ace king is 2, jacks and 10s are 3, pocket pairs lower than 10s are 4, high broadways with a focus on suited broadways, and by that I mean king queen, ace jack, and ace queen are the 5th one, and all other hands fall into the 6th one. Now, I kind of approximated, this is definitely not scientific, but I decided to break down how often when you raise one of these hands and you face a 3-bet, how often you should be 4-betting, which is the green, folding, which is the red, and calling, which is the blue. So as you can see, we are so about 20% of the time when we raise aces and kings, we are 3-betting, or we're just flatting, and about 80% of the time we are 4-betting or re-raising the 3-bet. So queens and ace king, we're calling a lot more, and we are folding infrequently, set about 10% of the time when we raise ace king preflop or queens and face a 3-bet, we're going to be folding. And we're going to talk about, I'll break down these categories later on. So in fact, today I want to cover aces and kings and queens and ace king. So, and then in the next video, I'll try to cover as many of the others as I can. Now, things to consider. In addition to your hand strength, obviously your hand strength is fundamental in everything that you do. But the other things to consider are stack sizes. The one thing here is the deeper you are, the less or the more willing you should be to call, and the less happy you should be in 4-betting for value. So basically, the deeper you are, the more narrow the 4-betting for value ranges go, all else being equal. The size of the 3-bet, the higher the price, the less frequently you should be playing back unless you have a specific read, and the lower the price, the more frequently you should be continuing. Stats and reads, the looser someone is 3-betting, and in fact the looser someone is playing, the more frequently you should continue against the 3-bet. Villain's position, as we mentioned earlier, ranges are tightest from the blinds and middle position, and loosest from the button. So we'll consider that as well. Other players involved, if someone is squeezing, that creates a different dynamic than if an opponent is just 3-betting you normally. If you face a 3-bet and someone overcalls, that changes the dynamic again, and that influences the way we play our hand. And finally, blockers. Blockers reduce a villain's value range. So for example, let me bring up Flopzilla. And they can reduce a villain's value range substantially. So I'm going to say when you raise from early position, by default, I would say if someone 3-bets you with the range of queens plus an ace king, they're going to be 3-betting you for value and are unlikely to fold. So that's 34 combinations in that range. Now, if you have an ace, for example, the ace of hearts, that reduces that combination by 7. So 7 out of 34 is roughly 21%. So if you have an ace in your hand, that reduces their value range by about 20%. If you have a king in your hand, that reduces the value range. It looks like about the same. And if you have a hand like king queen, you have you're down to 24 combinations. So 24 out of 34 is 70%. So that's a great hand to be 4-bet bluffing because you block a lot of their value combinations. When playing aces and kings, you should be 4-betting frequently, and you should be 4-betting kings much more so than aces, since people tend to 3-bet a range which has more aces than kings, and thus when you do have aces, you've got blockers to a lot of hands that they could be 3-betting. And willing to like call. Someone could like 3-bet ace queen and then be willing to call against your kings. Anytime there's a squeeze, it's a good time to be 4-betting. Now, you should be willing to call aces in heads up pot a lot more versus regulars. So just taking a quick look at these hands, the way I'm going to filter this is set everything up where you've got your early position is checked, face preflop 3-bet is highlighted as an advanced filter. Then I go to hole cards and I select aces and kings, and as we do this, like later on, I'm going to select 2 through 9s. And I'm not going to go through that process, but basically this is where you can find it. So he's had aces 19 times and kings 18 times, and look at how often he has had a fold when he 4-bet aces, which means that if we're getting that many folds, we should be calling more. With kings, it's a lot less so. Now, part of it is just sample size, but part of it is just this idea of you're much better off flatting aces in a lot of spots. So let me show you one of these spots with pocket aces. So we raise and face a 3-bet from a regular, kind of a nitty person from the big blind. Now, as you saw earlier, the big blind is one of those positions that people tend to 3-bet the tightest from. So when you come over the top here and you make it 475, it's going to be very difficult for him to continue with most of his range. So I think he won't fold kings, but he might fold queens, and he definitely should fold ace king. Therefore, you are much better off flatting here pre-flop and playing some poker in position. Let's take a look at another one of these hands, pocket aces. I like 4-betting here because we face a squeeze from a tight player, and he can perceive us to be like he could perceive us to be 4-betting light because he is squeezing, and he's squeezing in position. But there's no reason to make it 760. There's no reason to 3x it. We are a little bit deeper. We start out the hand with looks like about $32, which is what, around between 125 and 130 big blinds deep. But there's just no reason to bomb it. It allows him to get away from too many hands. I would make it something like 575 or whatever. And he ends up folding, which is fine. But here's an example of where we should be once again 4-betting aces. I'm not showing a lot of the spots where we should be flatting aces pre-flop. Basically, if you're in a position for like 100 big blinds with a regular and they're making it 3x, you should just be flatting frequently. All right, pocket aces. Here, this player's playing 45-27, playing kind of crazy. I would just go ahead and click it back, make it something like $3.50 or $4, and just try to get it all in pre-flop. If he is squeezing here with a hand like pocket eights or pocket eights or like king queen, he's willing to get it all in pre-flop, let's just go ahead and let him. We end up flatting, which isn't horrible, but like I said, I think 4-betting's better. Then he bombs this flop, and the turn is a queen, and he's got very little left, so we put him all in, and he shows us the hammer, the awesome bluff-tastic 2-7 suited, which ends up cracking our aces. Let's take a look at one of the king's hands. So this hand's kind of interesting, just because we're playing against a player who's playing a third of his hands, and he's playing super aggressively. He ends up 4-betting us here, or 3-betting, and we are deep. We're definitely very deep, but we have position on him, and while against a regular, I would be calling with kings here pretty much always, given how deep we are. But against this 35-35 player, after 72 hands, I would just 4-bet it. and look to extract value in position. We end up flatting, which isn't horrible, but like I said, I think 4-betting is better. Once he checks, I would just bet the flop and go from there. Try to get value. If he has any 2-over cards, he's not going to be folding this flop. I think he's just going to be calling it pretty wide. And then we end up betting the turn and taking it down. When playing small pocket pairs between 2s and 9s, I recommend that you almost always set mine. If you don't, you're just going to get into a lot of trouble. And pocket pairs are not the kind of hands that you want to be calling down with, unless you hit a set, obviously. The 3 main areas to consider are your SPR post-flop. So if you face a small 3-bet size, you're going to have fairly high stack to pot ratio post-flop. And if you start out deep stacked, or deeper stacked, so like 130 big blinds or so, you're going to have more leverage to call and try to hit a set. Anytime you have a chance to be in a multi-way pot, that is also a good opportunity to try to hit a set. You're much more likely to realize your equity and your implied odds are better. It's much more likely that someone's going to have something in a multi-way pot, so you're more likely to get paid off on your set. And finally, position. Position is one of those things where it's not as important with pocket pairs, but you're still much more likely to get paid off in position than out of position. So I picked out some hands, and let's take a look at them now. And I'll talk about how each of these factors plays into each of these hands. So we raise pocket 7s, and here it's going to be 35 more cents to call, and we have position on 1 player, and it's going to be multi-way. So this is like the dream scenario of trying to set mine. We call and we miss, and we're just gonna give up. Well, it's now we only need 7% equity. It's actually pretty close. With implied odds, I actually peel here and just try to hit my 2-outer, and we miss, and now we just give it up. So that's that. Let me move that hand. The next one, pocket 3s, we end up raising. So here the flop is going to be heads up, and the villain is relatively loose and aggressive, or at least appears that way right now. Well, like slightly laggish. He's playing with a VPIP of 25. Small sample size. I wouldn't put too much merit into the 3-bet percentage. But in general, this is just going to be a fold. We are not going to be getting a good enough price here to continue with 3s. Pocket 8s. Great price. Good spot to continue. We hit our set. Once the initial raiser ends up checking, I just go ahead and I would go ahead and raise here. I would put the button who seems like an unknown on a hand like 9s, 10s, jacks, and I want to just take initiative in the hand. I also don't want like a 5 or a 6 to roll off, so yeah, I would just raise here. I would make it something like, 450 and then bet turn, bet river. So we end up calling. At this point, the 9 comes. I would definitely bet. I would lead the turn. Just because we check call the flop doesn't mean we can't lead the turn. And it goes check, check. And now there's a 4 straight multi-way, or 2-way. We end up betting about half pot and get called by jack 8. So that kind of demonstrates how if we were in position, we would get paid off much more. All right, pocket 5s. We get 3-bet from the small blind, so we expect him to have a stronger range. The villain's also playing 17-15, so it's kind of taggish. And we started out the hands, looks like 100 and let's see, 2, 3. I mean, not that much above 100 big blinds, so I think calling here is fine, and just looking to hit a set is okay. So we call and we miss. So here we have position, and the guy has a fairly well-defined range. So it should be pretty easy to play post-flop. Let's look at these pocket nines. I don't like calling here. We don't have a good price. We don't have position. And the guy's 3-betting us from middle position, so... and it's just going to be heads up. This is just going to be a losing play for us. We're just going to have to give it up on a lot of flops, and we don't have the odds to continue just to set mine. So that is it for this episode. If you guys have any questions or comments, please let me know. Next time around, we're going to look at playing ace-kings, queens, jacks, tens, and whatever else we can get to. Until next time, for cardknowledge.com, this has been Vernier. Good luck at the tables, guys.